What do rich people think is normal but isn't? Story 1. Spontaneity. They can randomly decide to do things without much planning, knowing that money will not be an issue. This applies from random fancy dinners to major trips out of the country. Couple that with solutions to problems always being simple when they have that money on hand. I hate whenever someone offers a solution like, why don't you just go get a blank? Or you gotta call someone to come blank, or that's why you get blank. People can't just get things, even if they need it. This reminds me of a neighbor I met who had wanted a landscaping machine that required a $400 safety deposit, and he was annoyed that it had taken them 5 days to return the deposit. I was like, what's the problem? Thought that surely he had used a credit card, and so who cares if it only took a few days? As long as he stays on top of it to make sure the charge comes off, it shouldn't affect him at all. But no, he had used a debit card and needed access to that $400 in order to pay for other things. We don't live in a rich neighborhood, but a solidly middle-class one. His house and yard are kept in beautiful condition. He has a big truck, his wife has an SUV. They have a boat. I was surprised to hear that a man in his 40s A, doesn't use credit to his advantage, and B, to the point that a $400 safety deposit is a big handicap for him. Or is it wildly in the opposite direction and he is independently wealthy and stays so because of his meticulous budgeting? However, still, this would not explain why he wouldn't use credit card rewards to his advantage, and he seemed more nervously annoyed about not getting the $400 back in time, as if he actually needed it for something. My mother-in-law was married to a really wealthy, to me at least, guy. He repaired and painted private jets, millions per year. So one weekend he sent us first-class tickets to come to visit. We get to talking and hit it off as I'm drooling over his Porsche 911 project he's got going in his garage, and the hot pink McLaren next to it. Put on his patio, there's a nice grill setup, but it's a prefab piece of junk that came with the house. He mentions how it doesn't work, and I tell him it's garbage and should be replaced. Throw me the keys to the McLaren. Let's go find a new one. I drive like a grandma in Dallas traffic to this ritzy-ass mall. We spend an hour looking around and he asks what I'd buy. He wants the green egg, but there's this awesome pellet combo that's sweet. I explained I used to be a chef and this was the setup we used, and was dead simple and lasted forever. You sold me. Goes over to the manager and pays. Wants delivery. Okay, that will be extra. Awesome, I'd like that today. How fast can you make that happen? We can't. I'll make it worth your while. My son-in-law is cooking steaks for dinner and won't be here tomorrow. How's $5,000 on top sound? Cash? Me internally. What the fuck? 10 minutes later, the manager comes back and says, he will have it there in 2 hours. They are going to rent a truck. Great. Gives us time to hit the grocery store. He takes the keys, we drive back doing Mach freaking 2 across Dallas into Grapevine. He gets pulled over and says hi to the officer who hands him his info. The cop comes back and says, slow it down, thanks him and walks away. Me internally. What the fuck? Him. They know me. I support the rec league and they let me off if I'm under 100. Me. Oh. Rich people live in a different universe. When I was 20, my core friend group was well off and seemingly unaware of it. I got a call 30 minutes before work one time. Hey, we're going boating today, come down, it'll only be $50. When I told him that I had work in 30 minutes and didn't have $50 to spend on one afternoon of boating around, he told me to just call in, and didn't understand that I quite literally did not have $50. I still lived at home, but I was paying $600 in rent to my mother while working a minimum wage job. And it was unfathomable that I couldn't just call in. Just talking about stuff that only rich people can do or own without considering how it sounds to us poors. I'm a truck driver. I make okay money, but I'm definitely lower middle class, as are my coworkers. We had a big meeting where the company executives came to make an appearance and shake the hands of the common folk. One of my coworkers had recently gone to Cancun for 2 weeks. This was a major trip for him. He had to save up money to afford it, and also save up PTO to get off work for it. For him, this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime thing. One of the execs was making small talk with him, and it came up that he just got back from his Mexico trip, and the exec's eyes lit up. He was like, "OMG, my family and I love it there. Yeah, we have a house on such and such beach. We try to get down as often as we can. My daughter had her wedding there." Okay, bro. Later in the meeting, they had to break the news that annual cost of living raises would only be 1% this year and there would be no bonuses. I get it about the raises and bonuses. Same old BS, but how can you just come into this blue-collar joint talking about your vacation home in Cancun right before giving that news? How do you think you're relating to us by telling us that? The dude had no idea how out of touch he was. Story 2. I dated a guy whose folks were really rich. At one point, we were all riding around on his dad's speedboat on the lake where they had their million-something second home. We passed a big house that was somewhat bigger than the big house his dad and stepmom owned. His stepmom sighed softly and said, "I wonder how the other half lives. It must be nice." I work in construction renovating townhouses in Brooklyn. Nearly all our clients are trust fund babies. The account lady complains about rich people while she lives in the area, has another house on the water with a tennis court out east, and flew to England to go to Wimbledon this year, but bought the flights a few days in advance. I watched this play out in real time just 3 weeks ago at the nearly $3 million lake house of an orthopedic surgeon. I watched as his neighbor came over and excitedly wanted to show us something, a new $2+ million car for his very expensive, extensive car collection. As someone who makes a quarter of what the orthopedic surgeon does, I will never own what he does. He was almost despondent as he did his mental math and realized he could never own a $2+ million car. The stratification of capitalism is real. My parents are single-digit millionaires, which I discovered this year when they were redoing their will and invited me to sit in on a meeting with their financial advisor. Read, "Trying to buy my forgiveness before they croak." I informed my parents of the term FU money and, as gracefully as one can, that I will be retiring the moment their estate check clears. I'll be getting half of what they have, which apparently earns them $250,000 a year in interest. My mother raised her voice to exclaim, "You can't live on $120,000 a year." Mind you, that could be true in San Francisco, but we're in the Midwest. Internally, my first thought was, "Bitch, you know I live on less than $40K a year." And then second, oh my god, my mom is more than halfway to thinking a banana costs $10. People are always chasing the bigger fish, and it never ends. I had a friend who had a very successful business. She was making $500K a year. And I remember asking her if at this point, would you just work another decade and retire to live comfortably? I would. She told me she wanted to make more. Fast forward another year and her business exploded even more. She's now making $2 to $3 million a year. I asked her the same thing. She said, "I know I'm rich, but there are people out there way richer than me. I want to be like them." Making money is an addiction, and it becomes competitive. Once you become a millionaire, you hang out with people of your caliber or higher. Then you realize that a guy worth $50 million who is living an even more luxurious lifestyle is where you want to be for you to truly be happy. Then, once you get to $50 million net worth, you hang out with people of that caliber or higher, and you realize you want to be a $200 millionaire, and the process repeats, but it never ends. Story 3. If you grow up rich, it's pretty much everything. Essentially, it's atmosphere. My aunt's family was very well off. Her husband had a blue-collar background. The first time he saw her was the summer after his junior year of college, when he was part of a crew doing lawn work at her parents' house. They dated very briefly, but they had nothing in common. He busted his ass, got a few lucky breaks, and ended up with a very, very lucrative job. A few solid investments later, he was actually worth more than my aunt's whole family. 8 years after they met, he asked her out again. To hear him tell it, he took her to a really swanky restaurant with a long wait list, which he managed to bypass thanks to a friend who knew the owner. As soon as they sat down, he said to her, "I always wanted to take you to a place like this." My aunt looked around the room. She looked at him, and she said, "A place like what?" To her, it was just a restaurant. I know a guy like this. Went from doing road work, also as a summer job during college, to being filthy rich in less than a decade. I don't know how the hell they do it. Can't figure out if they're just insanely smart and a little lucky, or a little smart and insanely lucky. A lot of those blue-collar jobs actually pay insanely well. The key is if you get one to actually save the money, particularly with contract work when you are in a situation where you don't know how long this job will last and when the next one comes up. You also need to work on upskilling, as many people assume that their bodies will forever allow them to do that type of work, but age does not discriminate, and it will come for us all eventually. With all these factors, more luck does have to be on your side, but it can be possible. I think the money and the ability to work without a degree has been very appealing to Gen Z. I've seen a lot of Gen Z in my circle go this route, and I think it's great, but I do hope that they heed these warnings. My spouse has been in blue-collar work since he was 18, and he is now working on a career transition because you can really only do that type of work for so long. That reminds me of a rich person's observation I think about all the time. When money means nothing to you, it really is just your preference that determines everything. Your favorite food might be a steak from New York City's most high-end restaurant that most people will never taste. Or it could be a Little Caesars pizza, and you don't assign one any value over the other because without the price, it's just food. I'm the reverse of this, with a well-off family who dumped me into essentially the foster system because they could, and so I grew up eating government cheese. I went to my uncle's Christmas party, which is technically a potluck, but with hundreds of influential guests, so they hire caterers to handle all the food that's brought in, and also to man the bar. Apparently they pay them well enough that you cannot convince the bartenders to accept a tip. Again, I'm not rich. I show up one year and the caterer who takes my dumbass home-cooked biscuits goes, "My name... How do I know you?" It's one of my starving artist hipster acquaintances, whom I volunteer with at the starving artist hipster art thing with all our other starving artist hipster friends and acquaintances. I freeze up with panic. Please don't tell anyone I was here. I'm okay with people knowing that I learned to code switch at age 12 when I was living in a children's homeless shelter, but I am hideously embarrassed for anyone to find out that prior to that, I had to take sailing lessons at the local yacht club. I love that there's some guy who just brings in a stack of Domino's pizza every year. Story 4. Parents who know how to do things, who help you fill out college applications, who guide you into lessons, the right classes, how to rent an apartment, invest, etc., etc. Upper middle class kids have no idea how many things working class kids have to figure out for themselves because their parents have no experience in that stuff. Like the parents don't even know what it is that they don't know. I come from parents that immigrated here to the US that didn't know much English. Oh boy, no one taught me how to fill out university applications or the FAFSA. I had to figure it out for myself. That wasn't the hardest part. The widest eye-opening, jaw-dropping part was realizing that parents did a lot of the above for them. My college classmates. Parents paid for their college, housing, apartments, monthly allowances, credit cards for spending, and investment knowledge, providing them with huge down payments for their first house purchase, and trust funds. They had jobs lined up at their parents' firms, already knew about medical school because their parents were surgeons, etc. And most of them were out of state, too. Same here, but I'm British. I remember being 6 years old and talking to the electricity company because Mum was late to pay and we got into debt/cut off. They insisted on talking to my mum and I kept telling them that it's not a good idea. Eventually, they tried to talk to her and I got the phone quickly handed back to me. And don't get me started on trying to understand official government documents to translate, despite not knowing my number bonds to 10 yet. I grew up somewhat rich. A lot of my friends and even my wife didn't. There's a lot of financial advice I end up having to give out so people don't screw themselves over or get surprised by it. When my wife was trying to get her first apartment and we weren't married yet, I had to co-sign the lease because she quite literally didn't have a credit score. She saved up loads of money, enough that we could go years without working and still be fine, and on top of all of our bills. But without a credit score, it didn't matter. I also had a job for years where my whole thing was knowing how to walk people through getting the things they want or need done. Taxes, college applications, loan applications, job interviews, disability services, therapy appointments, credit cards, bank accounts, rental agreements, apartment inspections, ordering a pizza over the phone, first date etiquette, and pet adoption paperwork. I was the full-time guy who knows how to do stuff with paperwork. This is my favorite answer because generational wealth is, at least in my case, just parents passing on good advice, setting a model for their children to emulate, and oftentimes simply vouching for you as you get your feet in the door. My wife and I both come from middle-class families with many kids who won't be leaving us any assets in retirement, but they taught us how to balance finances, personal health, and relationship intimacy. They also bailed us out a $50 parking ticket here, a $100 college application fee there, etc., back before we had steady finances. The biggest things they did were 1. Do everything to get me to college except for pay the tuition. 2. Co-signed on my first mortgage 10 years ago because me and my wife's credit rating was terrible. And 3. Used their paid-off house as backup cash leverage that allowed us to present cash as we bid on our second home. Story 5. Telling their parents they want to be a musician or artist, and the parents don't ask if there's a backup plan. I dated a woman who had lived off the grid in a survivalist community where they built their own shelters and stuff. She said it took her a while to realize that the reason most of them were so carefree was because they had wealthy parents and trust funds, and at any point if it got too tough, they could just leave and catch a flight home. She didn't have the same options as them. LOL, that was my friend. She tried being a dancer for about 10 years out of college that her father paid for. She had a part-time gig here or there just for something to do. However, she lived off of funds from her father and a trust fund her grandmother had left for her. She quite literally had no idea how privileged she was. I feel like this is only partly true, and that it can go both ways. A lot of the rich parents that I know insist on their kids having a job where they can make lots of money and tell their kids, you can do that as a hobby. My parents were kind of in the middle of being that they told me, you can do whatever you want, but you won't survive if you don't have at least a steady income first. Most wealthy parents have a lot to say about this. Many of their children are pushed into the family business or an equally prestigious major. Law, medicine, economics, finance, maybe accounting. Wealthy women often study art history with the expectation of marrying a wealthy partner. In contrast, middle-class children are often encouraged to pursue careers in music or the arts, and many end up living with their parents in their suburban family home well into their 30s. Sometimes this can be the opposite. A lot of lower-income people are scrappy, so if something doesn't work out, they will find something else. I got a scholarship to play music and I went to college for it, but then after a few years I realized I really didn't want to be a musician. I donated my eggs, waited tables, went to paramedic school, and then landed a good job with the city. Hated that, so I joined the military. I didn't want to stay in, but I used that experience to get a good job, and now I have my GI Bill if I want to go to nursing school. But I do get that people going into jobs with poor markets can be a rich person thing. I went to college with a lot of people whose parents bought them $50,000 instruments. Mine is 70 years old and still needs tons of repairs. Story 6. I have one that nobody ever thinks about, but friendships. When you move in wealthy circles, maintaining a circle of friendships is much easier. They have the time, energy, and money to prioritize trips away together. They can meet their girlfriends for dinners because they have access to childcare and don't have to be up at 5 a.m. 5 to 7 days a week. They can outsource their admin. They don't have to be calling the electrician or spending the day taking their car to a mechanic. They have access to a high level of medical care, so may spend less time chasing medical issues around. They have the freedom to pursue those friendships. When you're working class, you and all of your friends are working their ass off just surviving and keeping on top of their responsibilities. We're all busy and exhausted, so maintaining friendships takes a lot of work and sacrifice. It's why we always see wealthy people with like 40 close friends, and we have like 2 close friends. We struggle to make time to see. Yes, my nephew recently married into society, and one thing I learned is, say your kid is graduating high school, you might throw him a party. In my nephew's in-laws' hood, you throw your kid a party, but then the neighbors throw him another party, and then you might throw their graduating kid a party. It'll be a summer of everybody throwing everyone a party. Yeah, it's even small things like, haven't seen you in a while. Me and the girls are going to brunch tomorrow if you want to join us. Sorry, I have to work. Me too, just leave for an hour or two. Not everyone has an I leave for an hour or two to go brunching. Ha, yes. We used to live in a really high-income town and our kids went to private school. Almost every mom there had a high-status job, yet was at the school most mornings for drop-off, lots of days for pickup, and would invite my wife to things like midweek lunch. Also, they were either going to or coming from a workout, or made up to the nines. My wife had a 9-to-5, and one day she just looked at me and said, "When did these women actually work?" The amount of leisure time they had was wild. This is a really good answer. I'm not rich, but very comfortable, and I had never even considered this. Many of the answers here are things people are aware of, but this one definitely answers the question of what one might not think about. I have a really robust group of friends. We meet for dinner once a week, sometimes more. Someone will plan an adults-only party and the others will say, "Just drop your child off with my nanny." If someone has a childcare issue, and no one worries about how much that will cost or how the nanny will get paid, we meet up to play golf or attend yoga class and take trips together without a second thought. Everyone is willing to host an impromptu get-together because it's not a burden. Not worried about the cost, not worried about the space, the house is clean because most people have housekeepers, and anything you don't have can be quickly delivered. We do all of this, and we all have children under 12. Thanks for sharing this. It's definitely given me perspective on something I may not have fully appreciated. Story 7. A friend of mine is a trust fund baby. She decided she wanted to hike the AT, so she quit her very comfy job, bought all the gear, and flew to Virginia. She only made it a few weeks and got bored. Came back home and her dad found her another very comfy job. I haven't been hiking since. I was floored by this. Another friend decided she wanted to be a dairy farmer. So she bought a farm in Kansas and got some cows. Then she had to hire a farmhand after 2 cows died because she didn't know they needed minerals. They just act so flippantly without care or thought. My girlfriend used to work at a blueberry farm in the area. It was started back in the 50s and handed down generationally until it was purchased by her boss back in like 10 years ago. They built it up, formed a respectable social media presence, and poured their hearts into the place. They decided to sell a couple of years ago as they were approaching retirement age. Sold it to a couple of trust fund kids from Seattle, mid-30-somethings siblings. Within a year, the barn burned down. They laid off over half of their staff and looked to have stopped pruning their blueberries. From the looks of the place and the social media sleuthing I've done, they pretty much lost interest in the venture and just went back to their previous lives. It's crazy how these rich kids could decide one day, it would be nice to have a blueberry farm, buy one for $2 million, fail, and then just move on. As someone who actually knows how to run a farm from working on them and consequently doesn't have the money to buy/start one, shit like this just kills me. Sometimes they hire a manager who knows what they're doing but often proceed to fight with them over unrealistic expectations. Their lack of experience only caused the epic fail. It is hard and expensive, and not romantic either way. I loved farming, but as someone born and raised in rural farmland, Oklahoma, who moved to Seattle 3 years ago, biotech MFG, I've had this talk with a few trust funders I've met. I want to run a farm. No, the hell you don't. You want to own a farm that you can explore and look at. You don't want to repair miles of fence. You don't want to winterize your property. You don't want to keep up with the expenses. You don't want to know what those shoulder-length gloves are for. You don't want to run a farm. You want to have a farm. If you have money to burn, use it to support some local farmers. Call them up, tell them you're interested in visiting their land and angel investing in their business. They know what they're doing, but I'm 100% sure they'd accept and let you help with harvest or digging thistles out of the pasture for a weekend. Oh, yeah. Good point. Yeah, my mom's friend did an Eat, Pray, Love style life change and wrote a book about it. Then she asked me in complete bewilderment, why doesn't everyone just do what they love? Life is so short. I was like, bills? Being too disabled? It's not that easy for everyone. She really didn't get the concept that not everyone can just do whatever they want to be happy. I was watching a Reno show, And these people were from Ohio and just went and bought a $2.2 million home in South Carolina because their daughter was getting married there. It was this lovely 7,400 square foot mansion formerly owned by Elizabeth Arden that was going to be where the wedding was held, as well as host most of their family members for the week of the wedding. They got really cagey on the show about whether they'd be living in the home, which seemed weird to me, so I googled it and they turned it into a B&B. They just got up and bought a $2.2 million home for their daughter's wedding and have a B&B going to another state on seemingly a whim. I'll never experience that level of FU money. Story 8. Their social networks. A small example, my son just graduated college with a degree in blah blah, and my good golf buddy owns a blah blah firm. I'll ask if he has a summer internship opening. Yeah, this is the real one. What rich people do better is network with other rich people, even if they are never going to give their children a trust fund. They're setting Junior up with a high-paying job using connections. This isn't to say middle-class people don't also do this, it's just that their network is typically also middle-class, so Junior's resume is landing on the desk of someone hiring for a $50K per year job. I had quite a funny experience in this department. I'm from a working-class trades background. All of my dad's mates are in the trades. After 30 years, a lot of them are doing quite well for themselves, have started a business, and are starting to take their hands off a little too. Anyhow, I asked some of them if they'd be happy to take me on as an apprentice. Their answer, nah, you'd be a liability. Stick to academics. That's what you're made for. Unfortunately, my family has no academic friends, nor do they have any connections to people who would have work suited to my abilities. Thankfully, I'm at a job now, but I really was starting to feel the limits of class connections. This is actually what private universities are very good for. Reddit loves to hate college and the debt that it comes with, but private universities are essentially giant networking opportunities. I'm in my mid-30s now, and every guy on my floor in my first-year dorm is now on a partner track in whatever field they ended up in. Accounting, law, doctor, etc. They all had internships throughout college and graduated with multiple job offers lined up. A couple $100,000 of debt means nothing if you get to trade it for a multi-year head start at whatever firm you end up at. Obviously, this doesn't work as easily if you go to a state school or community college. As someone who has never had that kind of social network, or at least knew how to use it, I've basically seen firsthand how useful they are in the last 7 months. I got turned down for an interview for a job that I was exceptionally qualified for, and because I knew a would-be coworker, I managed to get that rejection turned into an interview and a job offer for nearly 50% increase in compensation. And I purchased a beach house for a third of the comps in the area before the house was even listed, purely because I knew someone who knew the owner was looking to sell. I put myself through college working graveyard shifts and using 0% AP credit card terms and balance transfers. I didn't get financial aid until my last semester because my dad made too much for me to get aid, but not enough for him to help me. It sort of disgusts me just how much leverage a social network can give some people. Despite how I have benefited, it doesn't feel fair. This is the one that bothers me the most. I see it at my work all the time. Everyone is someone's something. I'm one of the few to have been recruited and hired purely for the resume and interview. It's frustrating because it also puts me at a disadvantage because no one is going to doubt or disappoint the child of their friend, or the wife's best friend. No matter how lacking in skill, knowledge, or craps that person may be. Total job security just because of who they know. Same with colleges. They just go to a university that everyone in the family goes to and has for generations. That's wealth just to be able to be like that. No previous job experience, just growing up always knowing that they'll never struggle and will always have a choice, unlike most of their coworkers. Story 9. The VP of my company once asked me why I don't get a maid and laundry service when he overheard me mentioning about not having enough free time. The CEO, multimillionaire of the startup I worked at in NYC, got so confused when my coworker who was in her own department had to take a day off because her kids were sick. Why doesn't she just let the nanny take care of them? She wondered. We were making $40K in New York City. I often had to choose what bill to skip so that I could eat that month. One of the execs my wife worked with heard that it was my dream to live in the country and have some land for lots of animals, like a hobby farm, pie in the sky idea. He sent her a bunch of affordable listings, all around $4 to $5 million. We're doing quite well financially, but these people are just in a totally different sphere. The owner of a company asked me why I didn't just buy a house in his area while he knew he paid me 8% of what he makes per hour. Literally told him he would need to increase my income by 6 times and still would require my wife to work full-time so that I could afford a $1 million home next to him. Shortly after, he also said, "Hey, you're smart, you should work for this company." I applied and used him as a reference and got a job paying 3 times what he was paying me at the time. As my starting wage, he offered to double my wage on the spot, but it was too late. At least he didn't sabotage my application and helped me advance my career, so there's that. Reminds me of when my landlord, while I was at university, told us a great money-saving hack for us. Get our parents to give us a supermarket voucher to buy our food, like she does for her son. I just gave her a funny look and told her I was not going to ask my parents to pay for my food. I mean, they could afford it, but what planet was she living on that she thought every parent would pay for their university-aged kids' food just because they asked? My wife and I are pretty middle class. She comes from a rich family, but they cut her off when we got together because they didn't want her with a white guy. Her father lives between 2 countries and has full-time maids in both places. When we had a baby, he offered to hire a full-time confinement maid for us to look after my wife and our baby. We had to explain to him that we didn't have the space in our tiny 2-bedroom apartment to accommodate another adult. We also don't have enough money to feed another mouth in the household. Even if he paid the wages, we still wouldn't be able to afford it. Story 10. Refrigerators that look like cabinets. That's actually a decent answer to this. Good kitchen design in general would be a big one. A well-designed kitchen is not cheap, but once executed also doesn't seem like a big deal until you experience a kitchen that wasn't designed well. My folks bought and flipped a house in their neighborhood, designed a crazy nice kitchen in it, wolf range, sub-zero fridge, the whole sham. New owners bought it completely new and before moving in redid the kitchen. As someone who likes to cook, I was floored. Like, what could you have possibly improved on this $200,000 kitchen? At a level above that, there's a refrigerator and freezer option that's a custom-built room of any size and shape that you want, kind of like a walk-in closet for food. Or a luxury commercial walk-in cooler, floor-to-ceiling shelves. It can have cabinet doors or automatically opening doors and will let you know when you're out of something. I believe the official name is a cold pantry. A friend of mine worked for a very high-end kitchen renovation place. He told me about one job. After they finished installing the new kitchen appliances, the customer complained that the refrigerator was too loud. So the solution was to basically cut holes in the floors so the motor could be removed from the refrigerator and installed in the basement. Obviously, this was not a cheap modification, but the customer did not bat an eye over the price. Story 11. I've eaten at some fancy restaurants before, but I'd like to know who those wine lists are made for, lol. I could fund a few months of traveling with what appears to be just a drink with an evening meal for some folks. I talked with the manager of a 3-star Michelin restaurant. There are people that are saving for a year or more to have a meal at their restaurant. He said that you can tell by the way they are tasting every bite instead of slobbering it all in. They are his and his chef's favorite customers. A friend's mother owned a high-class restaurant, and when you order an expensive wine, you pay for the whole bottle. People accepted it with no further questions. What she did with those opened bottles was very sweet. Every week there were people who came in. It was a highlight for them. They saved up for it, and it was a special occasion or something. Those customers were never able to taste such high-quality wines, so they were invited by the restaurant to taste a glass of what they had opened. It was incredibly appreciative of everyone, and some money-heavy patrons did occasionally order a bottle just to have one glass. There was always an open bottle. I worked at a fine dining restaurant that had bottles as high as $15,000. While I never saw one of them sold, I only worked there a short time. I do remember casually selling a $1,400 bottle of champagne to a table in the bar/lounge. The fact that they weren't even eating out for a special occasion and that it was just a normal, casual dinner for them left me envious. This lady just asked if we had the champagne she once had in France, and we did, and she was like, "Great, I'll take it." Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.